Hi, everyone, to a really special Houston Chronicle Live. We're here today with the Texas Book Festival and author Elizabeth Crook. I see a lot of you guys, attendees coming in now, and if this is your first time joining us, what we'd like to do is have everyone write in the chat where you are joining from today. So if you're coming to us from downtown Houston, from Katy, from Sugar Land, League City, we'd love to know which neighborhood, part of Houston or Texas, you're joining in from. All right, we have someone from Austin here. That's your neck of the woods there, Elizabeth
Yes,
and
it
Susanna.
is. Yes. Yeah.
Clear Lake, Seabrook, love it. A lot of Austinites here today, it seems. All right, and while everyone is getting situated, I just want to invite everyone to just, because this is a book club, this is a little different from our usual run of show. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your questions, especially during the first half of the discussion. If you have any comments, please drop them in the chat. We hope to share as many of these as possible. And of course, we'll have a time at the end where we'll ask questions to Elizabeth. All right, someone joining from out of town. Thank you for joining us. Durando, Colorado. Interesting. That's great. And while everyone's getting situated too, I just want to thank our sponsor, Libro FM. Libro FM is an audiobook company, and the cool thing about it is that the proceeds go directly to your local bookseller. So when I set up my account, I selected Blue Willow, which is, of course, a fan favorite here in Houston. Sarah, I know that's one of your favorites. So, I'm getting a lot of questions about the Libro FM audiobook credits that will be sent to you at the conclusion of this event. So hopefully hopefully before end of day tomorrow, they should all be dispersed. But thank you to Libro FM for sponsoring this. And all right, now we're about 2 minutes after the hour. So Susanna, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here today. I'm Susanna Aubie. I'm the development director of Texas Book Festival. We are thrilled to be collaborating with the Houston Chronicle and Libro FM to bring you this book club. For those of you who don't know Texas Book Festival, we're a 501c3 created in 1996 by then First Lady of Texas, Laura Bush, with a mission to connect authors and readers throughout Texas. We do this with our free annual book festival in downtown Austin and the Texas State Capitol, featuring 250 plus of the year's most interesting authors. We feature a broad lineup with something for everyone. This year's festival will be the weekend of November 16th to 17th. We also have free year-round literary programs, such as this one. We award $100,000 in library grants throughout the state with an emphasis on rural areas. Our grants are intended to fund new collections that meet the unique needs of each community. And finally, we provide 16,000 students in underserved schools and programs each year to award-winning authors and books of their own through our Reading Rockstars and Real Reads programs in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, Rio Grande Valley, Austin, and starting in 2025, San Marcos. We hope you'll follow us by subscribing to our newsletter and social media. And please, please, please come to the festival this fall, November 16th and 17th. It is my great pleasure to introduce the beloved Texas writer, Elizabeth Crook. Elizabeth is a dear friend, and she plays an important role in the Texas book and writer community and has long been involved with Texas Book Festival. Elizabeth is the author of 6 books, including The Night Journal, winner of the Spur Award from Western Writers of America, Monday, winner of the Jesse H. Jones Award from the Texas Institute of Letters, and her previous novel, The Which Way Tree, which is currently in development as a film with the screenplay she co-wrote with her friend and fellow Texan writer, Stephen Harrigan. Elizabeth was the 2023 recipient of the Texas Writer Award, which is another program of Texas Book Festival, where we recognize the achievements of writers who are from, currently reside in, or write about the glorious state of Texas. Elizabeth grew up in Texas, and her roots inform her work. Western sagas with themes of revenge, grit, loyalty, and love. Her novels sing with a sense of place and time, and they're informed by prodigious research. The Madstone happens to be my favorite, and it's told in the voice of an unforgettable young man who we first met in Elizabeth's 2018 book, The Which Way Tree. It isn't necessary to have read The Which Way Tree to immerse yourself in the Madstone, but once you meet and fall in love with Benjamin Shreve, I think you'll want to delve into it. This book is told in the form of a letter when it opens in November 1868 in Comfort, Texas. Benjamin Shreve is writing a letter to the young boy whose adventure is the focal point of the novel. Elizabeth, would you please set the stage and introduce us to Benjamin and the world of the Madstone by reading the first page?
Yes, but I want to first say thanks. I mean, having been to every single book festival except for one, I can attest to everything that Susanna said about how great it is. And so y'all come to Austin for the next one in November. And I also want to apologize. I hear that my dog is snoring, and if I put him out of the room, he will howl at the door and it will be more disruptive. But there's not like somebody snoring on my couch or something. If you hear him making noises, that's just where he lives all day. So and thank you to Lepro, and thank you so much to the Houston Chronicle. I was really, just surprised and honored to be selected to do this. And yes, I'll read that that first page and a half. So, Comfort, Texas, November 1868. Dear Small Tot, I hope to lay down these events in a manner helpful to you concerning some days you will probably not fully remember when you get older. I think you will want a clear idea of what occurred. It is plain to me I should do this, as otherwise you might worry over too many hard questions you can't ever answer. I will arrange for this account to come to you when you are 19 years of age or greater, not sooner, there being sundry adult matters involved in it. Currently, I am 19 years of age myself and think it a suitable age for you to read this. That should give you time to have done a few things and known people and figured some of them out. Also to have read books. Amongst the books given or borrowed to me is an autobiography of Benjamin Franklin about his quest at the age of 20 to improve on his morals and scruples. I figure he must have had worthy ideas by the age of 19 to have even embarked on such a notion. And from what I have seen of you, Tot, I believe you might grow to be equally wise, and 19 would do to read this. As well, don't read it if you don't want to, on account of you didn't ask for it. Another point made by Benjamin Franklin was how the best method to live your life over again, if a person might want to, is to put down tracks to recall it even whilst it takes place. He advised noting events on paper. I can't do that on your behalf, as you are but 4 years old currently, and no doubt seen different things from what I did, and seen some of the same things in different lights as well. But I will do what I can to that end. For myself, I am bound to remember these days I write about until the Reaper should come fetch me. So that's how the book begins, and it's written all as a letter to Todd in this recollection of this very life-changing adventure that they end up being on together. So.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I introduce myself. I'm Sarah Smith. I'm one of the senior reporters at the Houston Chronicle. I was not selected for this for my public speaking, so y'all will have to forgive me. I was picked because I am known as the Office Book Nerd. Especially to all y'all in Houston, I hope everyone's doing okay after Burl, and I'm particularly excited to be able to have this moment now because I always find that when the outside world is a little bit too much, I get my piece in the fictional world. So I'm very appreciative of being able to be in this headspace right now. So Elizabeth, I guess I'll start in the background. What is it about this particular moment in Texas history that draws you in? And like, what are the questions about it and the themes about it that you feel have been underexplored?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is Reconstruction era, 1868, so the Civil War is over. And there was just a lot about that period I did not know. There's certain segments that we study more in classes, and certain periods of time that are more written about. But Reconstruction era is the most fascinating to me because there's all this chaos. I mean, you still had all the chaos going on out west. And with indigenous people and all of that, and a lot of conflict, a lot of battles still going on in that direction. And then you have You know, the Civil War had divided much of the population of Texas, and that a lot of the people who settled in the hill country where Benjamin is from were German settlers who were opposed to joining the Confederacy. A lot of them had just tried to escape down to Mexico so they didn't have to conscript in the army and be conscripted in the army. So there was a lot of diversity in just the way people looked at what Texas was going to be. And to me, that's what makes a story interesting is you have conflict, you have different opinions, you have different kinds of people, and it's all mixed in during this period where all of those conflicts are still really, you know, intensely at play. So I loved this period of time. I loved work in the Which Way Tree. It's a couple of years earlier, but it is still, you know, at the close of the Civil War.
So from Comfort to San Antonio to Indianola, can you tell us a little bit about the towns you chose for this journey and why you chose them?
Well, I have these big maps. I wish I still had them out because they lived on this table for, you know, like 4 years, 5 years. And they, you know, were the old maps of Texas. And this is the route that people would have traveled. And, you know, I mean, I've been to all these little places, all these towns, and some of them now, you know, big cities. But to try to unravel what they were like exactly back then was really fun. I mean, like all the scenes that take place in San Antonio, I had to really learn what San Antonio was like at that point, and the Minger Hotel, which was there already and is still there, of course, and it's a really nice hotel. Um, uh, you know, plays a big role in the story. And so it was like a lot of little things I had a lot of fun learning, like, okay, where was the stables? If you were going to be, you know, stopping at the Minger Hotel, where did you put your horses or mules, you know? And to kind of find maps of the town and put all that together, I mean, it's fun. So each place, you know, I had to Sutherland Springs. Did it have springs? I mean, why was it called this, and what were the springs like? You know, that sort of thing that I had never really looked into, and so it was a lot of fun. And then Indianola, of course, it's a fascinating place because it was a growing port. It rivaled, you know, it was not as big as Galveston, but almost. It's where most of the immigrants from Poland and Germany and most of the European immigrants were coming in through Indianola, and then traveling, you know, west to settle in the Central Texas area. And it was wiped out by 2 successive hurricanes and then a fire. So there's nothing left of it. It's just a beach, and which is really interesting. So there's just something about, you know, the changes that have taken place in not that long of a time. When you think about this, you know, 1868, it's just not ages and ages ago. And yet, you know, there's just the way Texas has exploded is interesting. And to try to go back and figure out, okay, what was it like then? It was fun.
One of the things that I particularly loved about this was that you were able to find all these tiny details that, when like taken in sum, convey just a strong sense of place and accuracy, and the feeling that like I'm really back there in this time decades ago. How did you go about finding these details and doing your research?
Just reading a whole lot of books. You know, so the main thing that's helpful is to read memoirs from that period of time, letters from that period of time, where you really get a sense of the details of life. And then you can't put all that stuff in, because, you know, then it's just like, you know, you've taken all this time to learn everything. And so you're making your reader learn everything too, whether it's relevant or not. You know, you have to really only, you know, I mean, I talk about it like, you know, there's a boat, you're floating in the boat, you're putting all this stuff into it, and then it starts to get low in the water and you have to start throwing things out. What is absolutely relevant to the story, the development of the story, or the characters? And only those things can stay. I used to just fill up the boat and then, you know, and then have to throw everything overboard, which was very painful. Now, by my 6th book, I kind of know what to put in. And so I go through all these books, and, you know, I mean, it's just stacks of them. and, you know, on a really obscure things, you know, so you have to, I mean, you have to know about the weaponry there. You have to know, obviously, all about the vegetation. And I grew up in Texas, so that part isn't hard, but you have to know how people traveled. You know, you have to know what each place, each city is like, and just, you know, I mean, just the details. And then you have to know what's relevant and what's not. And that is always the trick, is not to burden the reader with too much extraneous stuff. And so one way of doing that, by writing this in first person, I had never written in first person before Benjamin, before his voice. By writing it in first person, you strip out all the extraneous stuff, because Benjamin is not going to say, I mean, an example I've used before is if you were writing in third person, really describing the scene, and they start a fire, you would need to know, okay, do they have matches? And, you know, they get out the matches. How do they do all this? You know, he's just going to say, we made a fire. So the story moves really quickly. And yet, you know, the visuals of it come through with just the details that you choose to put in. And that, I mean, to me, that's really fun. And it's kind of the trick to making it seem relevant and move along quickly, so that you don't have a big long book that's full of, you know, extraneous history.
So Benjamin has a very specific manner of speaking, and that came out a little bit in the passage you just shared with us.
Mhm.
How do you write that? Do you conceive of the plot and the dialogue points and then put them in Benjamin's voice, or are you so deep in the zone at some point that this just comes out in Benjamin's voice as you write?
Yeah. No, it just comes out in Benjamin's voice. And, you know, he's obviously uneducated. His grammar is not perfect. Um, uh, you know, he apologizes for that in the beginning. He knows this about himself, but he's read some books. And, you know, in the memoirs I've read from that period of time, and the letters and so forth, people had a pretty good vocabulary. You know, because most of them had read had read like the King James Bible, or, you know, they weren't illiterate, but they just weren't schooled to some degree. A lot of people, some like people in Benjamin's situation. And so it's, to me, it just is a matter of hearing it. I mean, from reading so much from that period of time, I just hear it, and I couldn't speak in that vernacular. If, you know, if somebody said, oh, say something like Benjamin says, that would be impossible for me. But if I've got my fingers on the keys, and I'm a very, very slow reader, so I tend to read out loud everything, all this tedious research, I read out loud to myself in order to get it into my head. And so the language also gets into my head. And, you know, I can't read, for instance, other books, novels that are written in first person, because I don't want that writer's voice to confuse me as to what Benjamin's voice is. But I read, you know, the authentic people who were writing during that period. And then it just, you know, I write out loud. I'm saying it as I'm typing it, you know, and it makes sense to my ear. You know, I think to other people's ears. I hope they seem to like it. So that's nice.
Following up on that, kind of a double-barreled question, so forgive me. I was interested, like you said, Benjamin was the first time in all of your 6 books you'd chosen first person. So what compelled you to do that for Benjamin, and then why the letter style? Like, was that something that you always envisioned, or was that something that you came to as you started exploring Benjamin's story?
Mhm. Well, for one thing, you know, he's a 17-year-old, and in this book he's 19. In Which Way Tree he's 17. He's writing under the mandate of a judge in The Which Way Tree. He's been, you know, a reason was given him to write, because it just seemed, I mean, no 17-year-old kid is going to sit down and write a long tale unless they've been told to do it. You know, in that period of time, I mean, he's trying to survive basically, and in The Which Way Tree to support his sister. So he doesn't have time to do that. But when the judge, who is trying, is at the close of the Civil War, the judges, circuit judges usually, who traveled from place to place, were brought in to try the war crimes that had happened. For instance, against the Germans. Germans had been killed and tortured and, you know, hanged and all kinds of things during the Civil War by Confederate soldiers, because they wouldn't join the army and they were trying to escape to Mexico or whatever. So these were tried as, as war crimes against civilians. And Benjamin is asked to testify about some hangings that he has, that he knows who did them. And he's seen the aftermath of he's seen the men hanging. He knows who was on the ground at the time. So he's asked to testify. And that's how he gets into this long story about his sister and the panther that has attacked, their mother, and that they end up tracking in the name of revenge. So it's a mandate to do it, and otherwise he wouldn't have done it. So that is why I had that one as letters. This one also, he would not have just sat down to write this unless there was a reason. So he needs to be writing to someone. And that also defines not only the voice that he's writing in, but what he says. For instance, I mean, this is kind of a love story. He falls in love with the mother of this little boy. And so there's that underlying romance, but how he's going to temper that when he's writing it to somebody who will be 19 when he reads it, because he's not, he's arranging for him to receive this when he's 19 years old. But it's about his mother. So there's not going to be a lot of graphic, stuff going on, but there's this undercurrent of this, really tender relationship that develops between Benjamin and Nell, the mother of Todd.
So what made you decide to further Benjamin's story? When did you decide, when did you make that decision? When did you know you were going to do that? And where did Benjamin come from?
Right. So Benjamin is completely, made up, and he's in the Which Way Tree. And I, after this many novels, I mean, this isn't as many as a lot of writers written, but for me, it was a lot. And I've, created a lot of characters, but he is my favorite. And he's an earnest, kind, honest, very plain spoken guy. And I honestly just missed him after I finished, writing The Which Way Tree. I mean, I missed writing in his voice, which is that idiosyncratic kind of uneducated, but well-informed and, wise sensibility about life behind it. I missed that voice. And I also had found it really fun to just kind of write in first person from his point of view, and tell the story that way. And I just want to spend, sort of more time with him, and give him a first love, just a further adventure. And so this book really grew out of The Which Way Tree, even though, as y'all explained in the beginning, it's not a sequel. It's not in that you don't have to have read one to read the other. They're both standalone novels, but he is the main character in both of them.
Be someone who, do you feel like you outline ahead of time, or do your characters totally surprise you, or are you somewhere in the middle, like as you go through this process?
Yeah, I don't think things out very well in the beginning. I usually, even with the plot, it's just, I can get to the end of the chapter and have no idea what's going to happen next. I mean, I sort of know where everybody's going to end up. I kind of know the road along the way where they're going, but when there has to be, when they're in a really tight spot and I have to sit down and think, what's going to happen next, it's more, what would these people, being who they are, actually do authentically if they were real people? Because I always want my characters to behave as they would if they're real people. Once they stop doing that, I stop believing in them. I stop caring about them, because why? They're not real. So you have to feel like, these are real people, and they're behaving realistically. So then you think, okay, what are they going to do? What's going to happen next? How are they going to get out of this? So it's doing that all along the way. And in doing that, these characters begin to really, really define themselves. And they're, I mean, in my first books, I had to get rid of, I would have too many characters. I would have to, go back and strip them down, just strip the books down, strip the characters out, and simplify. But now both of these books have a very small cast of characters, And so it's easy to keep track, and they're on a very linear path. So it's a really easy read. And the characters, by the time I define them chapter by chapter. So I'll write chapter 1, and then I'll go back and revise it. And then I'll write the next chapter, and then I'll go back and revise those 2. So by the time I'm getting to chapter 3 or chapter 4, I really know who these people are. And then it's a matter of every scene deciding how would they behave given who they are. Does that answer what you were asking? I'm not sure, it got long. So
It seems so. They're interesting. I love the idea of like you're creating these people, but they're also creating themselves and their own story, like as you move along with them.
mhm. Yeah, no, they do, because once you know them, it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, this is Nell. What's she going to say here? What's she going to do? What's her reaction gonna be? What is she feeling? Realistically, and I guess that's what novelists usually strive for.
Ever a moment like in the writing as these characters were becoming themselves where they did something that kind of surprised you?
Um, I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. As a writer, you're really pulling all the strings. So you're making it all happen. And I can't say, and you're very aware of making it happen. So I can't say that any of it surprises me. The characters as they develop, sometimes take on characteristics that I didn't know they were going to have. And they sort of become more, who they're going to be through all the revisions. But by the time you're really dealing with them in scenes, you are very aware that, I'm very aware that I'm doing this. I mean, it's one of the reasons I do not mind, and frankly kind of enjoy writing violent scenes, because I'm pulling those strings, and I know exactly how I want to play it. And whereas I don't like reading violent stories by somebody else or watching really violent movies because somebody else is in charge and I don't know what's going to happen. So there's that sense of control that you have when you're doing it yourself, which gives you peace of mind, because nothing's going to happen that you don't allow to happen. Does that make any sense? Okay.
So, Elizabeth, women in Texas seem to be at the heart of many of your books. And I know you're friends with many great Texas novelists who tend to write sort of men-centered books.
Mhm.
Do you feel that you're helping to fill a gap in Texas literature? And are there specific authors who've influenced your work?
I mean, there are authors like Stephen Harrigan, who's my best friend, and he's had a great influence on my work because he reads my drafts and critiques them and all of that. We tend to share our work as we're writing. And I'm interested to hear you say. I mean, I think of my books as having even keel between male and female characters, and in The Which Way Tree, for instance, Samantha, who is half Black, she's mixed race, and this is Benjamin's little sister. And she, she's the only girl in the whole thing. She's little, she's mixed race, she's disfigured by this panther, and she's a girl. So by all standards of the day, she would have been powerless. But Mr. Pacheco and Preacher Dobb and Benjamin all do her bidding at every turn. She's dictating what's happening simply by the force of will, and because it's her need for revenge that's driving the story. So I love the fact that she has this forceful power. She's kind of a pill. I mean, a lot of readers say, I love Benjamin, but Samantha, but that's what's so great about her, because she makes all of it happen just because she is so single-minded. So yes, in a lot of ways, often the women, sort of drive the story. But I think of my books, when I think back on the characters in Promised Lands and, some of those early books, it is often the men that I remember the most as far as just the population of the books.
Mhm. I think your women are pretty unforgettable though, too. I mean, I love what you do with women in books, and I see that. And of course, I have a big crush on Benjamin Shreve, so I can relate to that. Like he is the one who stays with me, but I do. Samantha is totally unforgettable, and who could conceive of a person like this who is so seemingly unlovable, and yet the people in her world seem to really care about her survival.
Yes, yes.
There's a trick to that you pulled off.
And Nell
And
in the Madstone, I love Nell, because she's a very quiet strength. She's a very soft-spoken person, and she has suffered through a lot. I mean, she's trying to escape from her husband because, and this was another thing I did not know about Reconstruction era, there were these gangs of people, and then this particular gang was a real gang called the Swamp Fox, and they were, they basically hid out in the swamp areas of East Texas and preyed on the freedmen and freedwomen and the people, of the Freedmen's Bureau, the government officials who were sent down to enforce the laws after the Civil War was over. And they murdered the main, guy in the Freedmen's Bureau who plays a role in this book. But she has become very gradually aware of what they're doing and of their really heinous crimes. And she's filled with a lot of guilt about when did she actually go from kind of suspecting to knowing. And so she once she realizes she really has to go forward, she goes and she tells where they are hiding out. And so they're after her. And her husband wants to take the son back. She's taken Tot and she's fleeing. And that's when, she ends up with Benjamin, who is trying to get her out of Texas, to the port of Indianola, where she can get on a ship and get to New Orleans. And so, her story is one of someone who's carrying a lot of guilt with her, and a lot of fear. And yet, in every instance, she's a very interior character, very strong, and makes really good decisions.
This answer can be a no comments, but I just imagine fast forwarding in Todd's life and this feeling that he has as he reads everything that Benjamin's telling him, and this like new past in his personal history that I don't know what he knows, we don't know up till then, like if that just recasts how he looks at himself, how he looks at his life. So I have to ask, do you feel like you might return to any of the characters in these books in the future?
I am tempted to, and I start thinking about it. I start reading about different periods. It would be a question of which period to return to, to much later in Benjamin's life, or just Todd at the age of 19 shows up to meet Benjamin after he's read this, so there are a lot of different periods I could use. And the problem is kind of a technical one, because you have to then, I mean, if you're bringing in characters from the past, it's a little tricky from past books because you have to assume people have read the other books. And, so you have to gauge. And by the time, it takes me like 7 years to read a book. So people won't remember, my books or want to be following up necessarily. And so you're kind of starting over with readership often when you wait that long, when it takes you that long to write a book. So that's the deal. It would be a little tricky to bring them back without having to do a lot of backstory explaining. I think I could do it, and I have thought about it. There's so many periods. I mean, we know that Benjamin ends up at the end of the Witchway Tree. We see him in old age, and we know he ends up, living kind of down near the border, South Texas, and has a cattle ranch. There was a whole lot going on down there at that period of time. And it would be really interesting to dive into that period. So I kind of tinker around. I start reading, different histories, trying to figure out, do I want to do that or do I want to just peel off and do something entirely different? So, I've always thought I could write 7 pretty good books in my life. This is number 6. So I can probably get out another one. You start looking ahead. Your life is the career and like, how much time do I really have? So,
Something tells me you won't be satisfied with just one more book.
yeah, maybe not. Maybe not.
Elizabeth, because this session is so generously sponsored by our friends at Libro FM, I do want to just ask you a little question about the fantastic audiobook adaptation of The Madstone. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you felt about that and what that's kind of been like and what that is like, really having your book turn into such a wonderful audiobook?
Yep. So it's the same reader as did The Which Way Tree. So Benjamin has the same voice. And when they were gonna, when I knew they were gonna do an audiobook of The Which Way Tree, this is Hachette. My publisher is Little Brown, which is owned by Hachette. So it's Hachette, who did the actual taping. I said, can I listen to some, can I help figure out who does it? Because the voice is so important. And so they gave me three auditions. And I mean, all the people were really good readers, but they were not right for the part. So the first one was, two were not right for the part. The first one was very, very Southern, which was all, to me, wrong to my ear. I mean, we in Texas hit our R's really hard, and this was the soft Southern, And so I thought, no. And then the second guy was very peppy. Well, Benjamin is so understated and deadpan, throughout. And part of what he says is really funny because he's not trying to be funny. It's just that he's so dutifully recalling events, and they're often gruesome events, but he just lays them out. So Pepe was all wrong. And then there was Will Collier, and he just nailed it. He was just right. And so, there were a couple of things I said, can I talk to him? Would y'all let me talk to him? And they said, well, we'll see if he'll do that. And it's not usual. And but he did. And, he said, how did you hear Benjamin's voice? And we talked about it. He's not a Texan. He got everything right. Well, in The Which Way Tree, and I told him about this. We laughed about it afterwards, but like there was one word. There were only 2 words he got wrong. One was pecan. He said pecan, or however they say it, not in Texas. And then Medina, the town of Medina, he said Medina. So I didn't listen to this, but I had people tell me. So before he read The Madstone, I texted, I emailed them and said, Will, we got to talk about pecan. I said it's like PUH and like con man, And so he said, okay, I got it. And then, Medina, I don't think was in that. So we didn't have to worry about that. But otherwise, he just nailed it. He read it so beautifully and just in the right tone of voice. And I've had so many people tell me how much they enjoyed it. And like I said, I haven't listened to it because, the last thing you want to do after you've written a book is listen to the whole thing again. So, but he's really, he's really good. I'm real proud of the audiobook. I always recommend it to people.
We love a accurate accent moment. I grew up in the Northeast. My entire extended family is in Texas, and my dad was the weird one in our tiny Massachusetts town who would go around saying all y'all.
Yeah.
And I would say things like, oh, that's wicked cool, y'all. And people were just looking at me like, where are you from? That makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it's a whole different way to talk.
Are there any, you mentioned that you go and you, like, obviously you do so much reading and you like touch on all these different periods. Like, are there any historical periods that you haven't explored yet that are particularly tempting or at the top of your list?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, because I'm a slow reader, I have to kind of narrow the field. I look at the books that James Michener wrote, and or somebody that just kind of covered the gamut and wrote different places about different places all over the world. And I just don't have that kind of brain. I just wouldn't be able to take it in. So I do better. I mean, I've moved around a little bit. My first book was is centered in Tennessee. It was called The Raven's Bride. It's about Sam Houston's very disastrous marriage, first marriage, which the young woman left him after 11 weeks, and that's why he ended up in Texas. He was governor of Tennessee at that time. So that one's all Tennessee politics, and that marriage. And then the next one was Texas history. It was the Texas Revolution period. And, sort of told from the viewpoint of various different factions. That was a big fat book. I still think it's my best, maybe my best written, but nobody's ever read it. So that's a midpoint. It's in that one, I had become uncomfortable writing the first one because I was dealing with real people in the first one, and I was having to attribute motive to them because you're giving them dialogue, you're giving them motive, and I didn't really know those people, and I didn't really have permission to do that. It's Sam Houston and his wife and the family. I became uncomfortable feeling the ghost looking over my shoulder and saying, no, you've got it wrong. And then, so with my second book, Promised Lands, I have historical characters. It's Texas, but I don't deal with them as first person. I don't deal with what they're thinking. They're simply characters within the context of my made up characters who are encountering them. So we see Sam Houston, we see, a lot of the people in the Mexican army, because that's a big part of the story. But we only see them through my fictional characters. And then, so that's the way I've written since then, is I set it in periods of history. The next one was New Mexico, actually, so it's still the West. The whole development of the railroad out there, it's centered around all of that and a love story. And then these two, well, Monday actually was in 1966, the shooting from the tower, from the UT Tower, and some of the people involved in that. So my characters are involved in that. And so it sort of is different periods and sort of is different places, but there's a certain similarity to the landscape, sort of, and the sensibility of, who these people are and where they come from. Those things remain somewhat similar. And then, of course, with these last two, they're both very, they're same place, same time. Yeah, same people. Yeah.
We have a bunch of wonderful questions from the audience. So I think Sarah and I will start sharing some of these questions with you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with this one. Do you think your books are contributing to a revised understanding of Texas history and in the history of the West? If so, how do you choose the topics to introduce that might go against standard thinking?
Yeah, so I do think they are. I try to put my characters in the time frame and have them behave as people of their time rather than people ahead of their time. So they definitely reflect the mores and everything of that period. There's not a falseness to them, explaining the things that we would now look back on as prejudice or whatever. They just are living in those times. But the story itself illuminates that whole thing, like dealing with the Swamp Fox gang in the Madstone. I had never heard of those gangs, and yet they terrorized mostly Northeast Texas during Reconstruction. And there were 3 of those gangs, and they killed a lot of people, a lot of and they not only tormented the blacks, but if the white population was paying fair wages to black workers or whatever, they were in trouble with the Swamp Fox gang. So they really, and then they had their supporters who helped them hide out and who helped them get out of jail if they were locked up. So they kind of ran those towns lawlessly. And I didn't know about that period of time. You always hear about all the lawlessness out west. This was happening, in the Northeast. So by telling those stories, and in Promised Lands, you know, the story of the revolution is told through Latino characters as well as my, you know, Anglo settlers. And so you have a lot of crossover between the two. You can't write with a lot of judgment. If you start imposing our own sensibilities and judgments on the characters, there's it just strikes something wrong. So the characters have to be who they are, but if you develop them in the right way, they do illuminate the time period and the problems with the time period and the injustices and all of that. So yes, I do try to have all of that in there, because it's that kind of conflict that drives a plot forward.
This is I'm sorry, Sarah, I was going to finish this question. Julie, this is from Julie Connor, who, an extension to that question is, do you have any thoughts about the current controversy about Texas independence, slavery, and the Alamo?
Oh, wow. I hear lots and lots of opinions. I would feel, you know, out of place trying to make comments on that kind of thing. It's just a very, very complicated political situation. And, you know, we make a lot of progress, we make a lot of changes. People do learn, you know, hopefully from mistakes of the past. And I think my part in that is simply to illuminate the mistakes of the past, you know, in a way that's tenable, that doesn't sound didactic, you know, or like a lesson, you know. So, but it comes through, it percolates up through the story, hopefully. Yeah.
And another reader asked a question in a similar vein. What do you feel most readers misunderstand about the historical setting of the period that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that most people don't understand just how lawless. I mean, Texas had the reputation at the close of the Civil War of being the most difficult place to corral and contain, and get people to abide by the new laws, because it's a big sprawling state, and Texans did not feel defeated the way the West felt. I mean, the way the South felt defeated. I mean, the South had been, you know, burned out and knocked down and, you know, really left in shambles at the close of the Civil War. Texans had sent people to those battles, but the battles had not taken place on Texas soil in the same way. I mean, there were some, you know, along the coast and things like that, but there, you didn't have the destruction, the level of destruction. So the people in Texas did not really feel like the war was over, and they felt they could, you know, continue. I mean, many of them did not release their, you know, their enslaved people for until, you know, way too late. I mean, they didn't even tell them they were supposed to be free. You know, it was like there was denial, and a lot of unfairness and injustice that went on in Texas that I just had never really studied that period of time. I had studied the standard things that you learn in school, and I, you know, I mean, I had really good teachers, but I grew up a long time ago, you know. And I was in, you know, 7th grade, taking 7th grade history class in, I think, 1971, you know, so it's a long time ago. And there were just different lessons. So, you know, it's interesting though. I had a teacher, a history teacher I loved, I still love, and in San Marcos Public Schools. And he, you know, he gave us a bunch of books to read that did really show us some different, you know, open our eyes to some different things than the standard things that a lot of teachers were teaching. And you know, I had really good teachers in San Marcos.
So one attendee said this, I love the addition of real life historic Texas figures and events in the book. I went down a Colin Baker rabbit hole after his character appeared. Who are some other historical figures you'd like to include or explore in the future?
Oh, wow. Okay, so Cullen Baker was the Swamp Fox. He was the leader of the Swamp Fox. Really, really horrible person. Yeah, I just didn't even know about him. As far as others that I would like to explore, I mean, you just happen on those when you're reading. I haven't gotten far enough into my reading to know. But I did a lot of that in Promised Lands, my second book. There are a lot of characters in there that book centers on the Goliad massacre and how the South Texas ranchers at that time, who were largely Hispanic ranchers, how they were reacting to the war. Many of them were spying for the Mexican army, and as it was advancing, and so all of that comes into play. I learned about a lot of people researching that book that I would never have encountered otherwise, and was able to incorporate them, the agony of the person who ordered the massacre, and just reading, golly, it was so long. I wrote, I think his name was Padilla, so long ago that I wrote the book, but just some scenes with him the night before he makes that decision. And there's just a lot of a lot in his writings later that if I'm remembering right, where you really understand what was going on, with people who were carrying out orders that maybe they did or didn't believe in, and there was a lot of, so there were characters like that I learned a whole lot about that I would have never had exposure to in casual reading.
I will also flag, there are a few calls for a Samantha future and a Tot future. So I'm adding my voice to the future Tot brigade. Another reader was wondering if you have any dream casting for the main characters in the movie, particularly Benjamin and Nell.
So for Benjamin and Nell, no, here's the problem. If you cast young people early, they change by the time you get the money, you get the movie off the ground. They're like grown up. So I try not to even dream that way. I do have who I would love to be Mr. Pacheco, Lorenzo Pacheco in The Which Way Tree. I do have who I would love to be, Preacher Dobb, but I don't want to say because the guy that I would love to be Preacher Dobb is he's read the script, he likes the script, but we don't have the funding yet. So you have to make a solid offer to get them attached, because they're not going to commit to a certain time period when they don't know whether the movie's going to be made. So we're in that process. But he does really like the story and the character, and has said, let me know right when you yeah. So
we have time for one more question. Sarah, is there one that's jumping out at you that you want to wrap us up with?
I thought there most of the audience ones. These were great. If anyone wants to jump in, if not, I can just go for one of my own. That might not be as exciting to everyone. But are there any, I know we talked a lot about characters you return to and time periods you return to. Are there any themes that just keep drawing you back in as you write?
yeah, I mean, really Texas, it's just such, I mean, I love Texas. I have a lot of problems with Texas at the same time, mixed feelings. But again, to me, that's what makes drama, is when you have this diversity of opinions and, and a lot of conflict. And, Texas just time and time again offers that to a writer, conflict, and the different stands that good people take or that bad people take. I mean, you can play it any way you want to play it as an author. And but it's interesting because it's a complicated place. And to me, the more complication there is, in the backstory and in the underground, the more clarity you can get somehow, out of the story. That may not make any sense, but there's something I'm trying to say that I'm not saying well. But it just comes up through the story in a way that's not like it's not stated. It's just there, and to me that makes that's interesting. So yeah, so I keep coming back to Texas. I keep, like I said, I've done Tennessee and New Mexico. It's not like everything's been in Texas, but it's the place I know. And it's also, a lot easier for me to research because I know the vegetation. I spent a lot of time in Central Texas in the hills at my grandparents' ranch out there, and so I kind of know the world in a way that I don't would have to learn it if I made a story somewhere else.
All right. And with that, thank you, Elizabeth, for your time today. It was just such a treat to hear you read from your book and also just the rich discussion that followed. So thank you for your time, Susanna, Sarah, all of you attending with us today. Thanks for sharing some time with us.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Jennifer. Really appreciate
Y'all.
it. Yeah. Thanks for the hospitality.